The Competes Act, H.R. 4521, passed the House on February 4, 2022. Included in this bill are several amendments to the Lacey Act, which, if enacted, will have an enormous negative impact on the pet trade, the economy, and the environment. Listen to hear more from Project Piaba.
Hi everyone, I'm Jackie Anderson. I'm the Education Materials Coordinator for Project Piaba, and I'm here today with our Executive Director, Scott Dowd, and with law student Art Parola, who has clerked for a lot of Washington, D.C. law firms and is an expert on issues pertaining to endangered species and wildlife. So we're going to be talking today about an amendment to the Lacey Act that has recently passed the House of Representatives and is now in the Senate. And we're going to be talking about the impact that might have if it's passed into law. So first off, Art, can you explain to us what the Lacey Act is and what it does?
Sure. The Lacey Act is actually a very old a law in the U.S. here. It was the Lacey Act of 1900. Originally, the intent of the Lacey Act was to, since we have a federalist system and each state has their own individual wildlife laws, was to allow the federal government to assist the states in enforcing each state's wildlife laws, especially pertaining to hunting of migratory birds and other wildlife. So now, kind of fast forward to 2022, the Lacey Act also provides provisions to prevent invasive species. So the way that works is there's a list of what's called injurious species listings, which works as what we call a blacklist. And that's a list that you cannot, if the species is on this list, you are not allowed to import it into the United States, as it may cause harm to the environment, to human health, to the health of agricultural, either plants or animals. So really with this new legislation, that's the that's the portion of the Lacey Act that we're looking at. Now, a lot of people because the Lacey Act has several mechanisms and components to it, it does confuse a lot of people. But for the current legislation, what it would affect is it would expand that portion, the portion dealing with invasive species. It's more than invasive species because human health and animal health and agricultural health are all included. But really, what it comes down to usually, so for just ease of understanding, we'll say invasive species. So it prevents invasive species or potentially invasive species. To sum it up, the Lacey Act, the portion of the Lacey Act we're going to be discussing today has to do with preventing injurious wildlife introduction into the United States.
So right now we're talking about like snakeheads and things that could have.
Right. So things like the northern snakehead, which were introduced from food markets into the waters of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and several other states in the Northeast. Also, there's bullseye snakeheads, which actually have been in waterways in the Southeast since about the 1950s, I believe, from fish farm escapes. Yes. So sure, things like invasions like that are one of the primary purposes of the Lacey Act, to prevent invasions that could harm native wildlife and other things.
So how do the amendments that are in Congress right now, how do those change the Lacey Act?
So the amendments right now would take that blacklist. So if it's on the blacklist, you can't import it. That's how it works right now. Okay. What the amendments would do is three things. Number one, it would take that blacklist and kind of flip it over into a white list. So instead of saying, hey, here's a list of species that would have detrimental impact if they were to escape and become invasive in the United States. What it would do, flip that into, okay, here's a list of species that you know are not going to be invasive. So it's sort of it sort of goes from, well, you're innocent until proven guilty, to a species is guilty until proven innocent, which tends to be an un-American way of doing things, as well as not necessarily an effective way of doing things. I think that's more important, is it's really not an effective way of doing things. So what they call it under what the language actually is in the bill is presumption of injuriousness. So all species are presumed to be injurious to the United States unless otherwise exempt under what we call it, the words white. You will not see the words whitelist in the law, but that's actually practically speaking what we refer to it as.
What it is.
Would be a white. Now there's it gives federal government very wide latitude in banning species without due process, without going through any sort of review. So even if a species is on that white list, the federal government would be able to do what's called an emergency declaration. The Secretary of Interior could say, I believe this species to be injurious, and within 60 days, publish in the Federal Registrar and say, okay, this species is no longer able to be imported into the United States. They would not have to have any actual proof. They would not have to have any actual evidence that there's a threat from this species. They could just do that. And they then have 3 years to do studies to confirm or not confirm that species would be injurious. So it just gives them just a lot of power to do things that we can't quite gauge what the actual intent would be and the way that would be used or abused by people in the federal government. That does another thing too, and this is an interesting thing because the Lacey Act has gone back and forth with this throughout its iterations. So it would also ban interstate movement of any fish or any species that is not on the white list, which is a really, really big deal because so if a fish, if you have a fish in, let's say, Ohio, and you want to give it to your friend, or you're moving, or across the border to Indiana there, you could be a federal felon for just taking your pet fish with you if it's not on that white list, even if this is a fish you've had for a long time, it's your pets. You could taking them across the border, boom, you're a federal felon. Now, that was in place with the blacklist. That actually was in place until USARK v. Zinke, DC Court of Appeals decision, I believe it was in 2017, that court decision was made. And that overturned that and said, no, that is not the way the law is written. It's being wrongly interpreted. It does not, the Lacey Act does not stop interstate transport of species. Now it does do it between Alaska, Hawaii, the territories. There is still some exclusions where you take things on the blacklist, but for the most part, driving from state to state law, you're okay. So not only would we have a white list of which would likely be very, very small, you're not going to see a whole lot of species put on this list, more than likely, and then you're not going to be able to take those across state lines, and the federal government with just a note in the Federal Register could put anything they wanted, could take anything they wanted off that white list, declare them injurious, and so then it would probably take about 3 years before anything happened on that. So it's really it's the big issue is, number one, it's not going to be effective. We already have the injurious blacklist, and we can go through and add to that list and say, okay, this species is going to cause a problem here, or is very likely to cause a problem here. So we cannot import that into the United States. That already exists. The other big thing is that the United States is a very, very large geographical area. So we have, I was looking the other day, I think we have 11 of the 14 climate types in the United States. So we have a pretty wide range of climate types, and everything from, if you think without, the Everglades in South Florida, the habitat ecosystem there, very different than a lake in Minnesota. And the Lacey Act, the way that's written, injuriousness could be anywhere in the United States. So if it could live in the Everglades, it's presumed that this species could be invasive in a lake in Minnesota, which obviously common sense would say that that's ridiculous. Most of the time, that is not the case at all. Well, we have a way of dealing with that. Each state has the authority to create its own list and to prevent invasive species or injurious species. And so to do that, every state has a list that they can't bring these species into the state. So the more effective thing to do would be to take a look at those lists, maybe do some standardizing in the language to make it easier for people to follow the law, because the language is all over the place, and you really have to spend quite a bit of time digging, and maybe even have a law degree to figure it out half the time. So there are other ways that this is already being addressed effectively, and to make those current ways to strengthen the way they're addressed, or they're utilized, legally speaking, other than to just do this blanket overall prohibition ban that is likely to also not be effective. Number one, be incredibly hard to enforce, and to put people in jeopardy when they make a mistake that they don't necessarily mean. Because the criminal provisions of the Lacey Act that we talked about earlier, while they are a different section of the law, still apply to the blacklist and the injurious portion of the act. And so for every violation of the Lacey Act, the maximum punishment is 5 years in prison and or a $20,000 fine. So this is not something that's merely, okay, slap on the wrist speeding ticket. We're talking about some very, very serious criminal penalties for any violations of the act. And remember, you don't have to realize that you're breaking the law to, I didn't know, I'm sorry, I didn't know is not an excuse. So that can really cause problems, especially when people have beloved pets that they may be taking across state lines for one reason or another.
And this is really going to affect the species, the number of species, and the list of species that are legal to be imported as well. So like fish,
yes,
fish importers, fish exporters, the number of species and the type of species that are available for the aquarium trade is going to change a lot. And so one of the things that Project Piaba does is we've been studying fish populations and the aquarium fish fisheries of the Rio Negro region for more than 30 years, and have so much evidence that it's not only sustainable from a standpoint of population management for the fish, but it's also beneficial in that it provides people with economically and environmentally friendly linked income. So it's basically incentivizing environmental conservation. So coming up here, I'd like to talk to Scott about how he thinks these amendments, as they're written now, if they pass, what kind of impact that would have on the environment. And a lot of times people so far have been thinking about like their fish at home, and their if I take my fish to, if I move to Rhode Island and I take my fish tank with me, am I gonna be a felon? But it's actually a lot bigger than us here as fish keepers. It's people's businesses, it's people's livelihoods. It's a lot of stuff that's at stake here. So we're going to talk about that with Scott. So thinking about this from a livelihood standpoint, and from an impact that the amendments to the Lacey Act could have on the environment. So Scott, our executive director, what do you think? What could happen with this? How could this be bad?
Thanks, Jackie, and hello, my name is Scott Dowd. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Project Piaba. As Jackie mentioned, we're working in the Brazilian Amazon and focusing our studies on the aquarium trade of the Rio Negro. And we've been studying that for more than 30 years now. And we have discovered something fantastic, that the fish populations, because of the hydrological cycles in the Rio Negro, are not threatened in any way by the offtake for the global aquarium trade. And the people that reside in the rainforest in the mid Rio Negro area have been catching fish for export for the global aquarium trade demand for more than 3 generations now. And as I said, there's been no threat to the fish species that are being captured. And beyond that, this provides the basis of livelihoods for people that are living remotely in the Amazon rainforest. They have this resource of the abundant tropical fish, the aquarium fish of the Rio Negro, and the global demand. And that enables them to base their livelihoods. They're able to capture fish and connect them with the supply chain and get paid, which allows them to meet the basic needs of their families and themselves, where there would otherwise be very few opportunities and almost no sustainable opportunities. And actually, since they're so connected to the environment via the health and the robustness of the fish populations, they care very much about environmental health. In this region, human health and environmental health are tied together. And that has effectively motivated these small artisanal fishing communities to protect not only the fish species, not only the rivers, but the entire floodplains, which is a huge region of tropical Amazon forest. And it is the region where many IUCN red listed critically endangered species occur. There is a tremendous amount of carbon that is sequestered in the trees and the forests that are protected by the aquarium trade, and also a lot of atmospheric scrubbing that goes on from those tropical forests. In fact, the United Nations has 17 goals for sustainability, and this aquarium fishery meets every single one of those goals. So if this act is realized, it would likely shut down or irrevocably damage this fishery. And the knock-on effect would be these communities that have been protecting Amazon forest for generations would suddenly find themselves in a situation where there would be broad spread poverty, food security issues, and the people would have to turn to alternative livelihoods in order to try to support their families. And as we've seen in other parts of the Amazon, they're usually environmentally destructive. Timber harvest, cattle ranching, gold mining, migration to urban slums would all be likely alternatives that these fishing communities would shift to. This case study has been provided to IUCN, and this is the group of the world's leading environmental scientists, and they now recognize the aquarium trade as a unique and powerful tool of environmental conservation and benefits for human populations living in rural areas that would otherwise be facing poverty. What we're doing now is we're looking worldwide throughout the tropics for other models where residents living in areas of biological importance have been motivated to protect the environment because they're dependent on aquarium fish. And we're seeking to foster and promote those fisheries. And this act would cut off the IUCN's initiative at the knees if it is enacted. Zoos and aquariums also are showcasing these case studies and these models to the public to inspire their visitors to start a home aquarium as an act of conservation to help support these economies in rural areas. And I'm sure the properly done risk assessment of these small fish that originate from the tropics represent very little threat to the United States. The aquarium fish industry has been going on for generations now, and other than the Everglades in South Florida, there are extremely few examples of where the aquarium trade has resulted in the establishment of injurious species.
And so
Yeah, and to Scott's point as well, with the even though that risk screening could occur and likely would find that there's very little risk, getting those risk screenings done is timely, it is costly, and unfortunately, probably a lot of fish would not be able to undergo that. Also, the inflexibility of the Lacey Act would mean that if South Florida could be a problem, or Hawaii could be a problem, or Puerto Rico could be a problem, the subtropical and tropical minority geographic areas of the United States, well, that could still impact the rest of the country's ability to to access those species, and the ability of the fishermen and those who rely on this for their livelihoods, and for the conservation benefits it provides to operate and continue to do so. There's a really big irony here, and that's that the Competes Act is a law that is supposed to drive economic prosperity in the United States. And not only would this law affect people in these remote areas with high biodiversity in other countries, such as the Brazilian Amazon, but would also, here at home, those fish coming into the United States creates a large number of jobs, whether it be someone manufacturing aquarium pumps and filters, or a local independent pet shop that's selling this fish and talking about the conservation benefits to its customers, and educating the customers about the threats to aquatic ecosystems, both here and abroad. All of those jobs and livelihoods would be affected. So while this is the intent of this bill, the Competes Act, is to increase economic prosperity and make us more competitive, and expand the economy, it would actually contract the economy and lead to less economic prosperity. So not only does this have vast environmental impacts down the line, it also is going to have some pretty destructive economic impacts, which are contrary to the intent of the bill.
Yeah, it's an 18 to $20 billion industry, according to a paper that I have from last year. So it's a huge deal for people here too, for all the fish businesses and everything. So I think in summary,
it's not just fish businesses. I mean, airlines are involved here. Packing materials. That this industry has a lot of downstream impact on other people who you may not even recognize, that are not involved in live fish in any way, shape, or form, but their businesses do rely heavily on the aquarium trade.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things too is that these amendments to the Lacey Act that we're talking about today are embedded in a much bigger bill that, what is it, like a 1,700-page document that's about a lot of stuff that looks good, that looks environmentally friendly, and there's a lot of it's kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing, I guess is the way to.
Right. And it's important to remember too that this was slipped in at the last minute. It was purposely done. The activist groups behind this recognize the detrimental impacts this will have to a lot of people. I think they're naive to the detrimental impacts it would have on the environment, but they knew this would not be popular. They knew this would be detrimental, and they put it in at the last minute to avoid too many people looking into it, or give people the opportunity to say, hey, wait a second, what are the actual impacts on this? This did not go through the normal House committees that it would have to be approved and sent to the House floor. It was just stuck in the bill, and really there was no time for debate. There was no time for, okay, let's actually look at, is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? Because, the old adage is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And this definitely fits in there. Now on its face, okay, yeah, protecting U.S. ecosystems and our native species and our agriculture here is very, very important. Very much so. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. The question is, how effective is this? And we also have to understand that there are alternative motivations here. A lot of the groups, organizations, and people pushing this, their focus is not on ecosystems and populations. Their focus is on individual animals and what they see as animal welfare issues. But this is not animal welfare legislation. This is environmental legislation. So that's really not the correct lens to view this through. Now, not that we can't make strides in other areas to increase animal welfare, and I think a lot of people are already doing that. But really, what this is people who see aquariums as fish prisons, and that's really what this is stemming from. Is they want to, and in the wildlife trade, as they see it as exploitive and not a good thing for animals or people. And as Scott has said, that's just not the case. This is a great thing for wildlife and people when managed successfully. And Project Piaba has shown that it can be done. And I think that model is that the model doesn't just apply to Project Piaba. I've been diving with aquarium marine fish collectors in the Philippines, and they do an incredible job of managing their resources. They take non-breeding fish that have high fecundity, which means they just make a lot of baby fish and not many survive. They're not taking the big breeders. They're taking the juveniles, which would most likely be eaten and not make it to adulthood and breeding it anyway. And it's generating a lot of income. They're not putting pressure on the food fish, which are taken as the breeding individuals, which has a massive impact. So it diversifies the local economy to allow for more sustainable uses of the natural resources there. I mean, it's a win for everyone. It's a win for the environment. It's a win for people. It really empowers people, and it really conserves nature and biodiversity. And we're going to lose that. The likelihood that we're going to lose a lot of those benefits should this pass is extremely high. So we need to look at the intent. The intent really is by activists who have a philosophy, but we should debate that philosophy openly and honestly, and it's not being done here. This is environmental legislation being hijacked by animal rights groups. That's what it is at its core.
Yeah, that sounds a little misguided, and not to mention like the number of ways in which the aquarium industry has helped. Like I'm thinking of fish that are extinct in the wild that only exist in aquariums now, and fish that are endangered in the wild that only exist in aquariums now because of environmental impacts that have happened in their habitats. That
right.
There's an ability to prevent that before you have the extinction events and those things. And the aquarium trade is a powerful driver of environmental conservation in that way. So in conclusion, I'd like to talk a little bit about what can people who care about fish and who care about the environment and the rainforest, what can people who care do about this?
Sure. I think the biggest thing right now is contact your senator. It's an election year. People are going, senators and are going to be listening to what do people care about, and tell them, look, this is not good for the United States. This will not promote jobs. This will not protect biodiversity. This will not prevent invasions. We already have effective legislation and effective regulation there that can be utilized. Let's focus on that, and not go overboard here and throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think it's really important. Your point there is absolutely correct about that there's kind of two sides of the conservation, really three with aquariums, and the first is education. Just people will protect what they know and love. And aquariums really, I'm not sure there's any other way to connect people with aquatic ecosystems better than aquariums. I just don't think there is any other way that creates that ability for someone to say, wow, that's really neat. Oh my gosh, this is under threat. I need to look into this more. I think that initial inspiration they provide is just, there's no alternative for it. The second thing is the impact, and probably the biggest quantifiable impact is models like the Project Piaba model, which are all over the world. Project Piaba has done a phenomenal job of showcasing it in the Rio Negro fishery in Brazil. But that model is not exclusive there, and not exclusive to fish even. There are reptiles, there are birds, there are all sorts of other animals in plant species that this model is already being utilized for, or could be managed better using this model. And so this legislation we don't know what species. It's sort of one of those things where the legislature is like, well, pass this and we'll figure out what it's going to do. And that's just not a good way to create policy and law. So that's the second big thing. The third big thing is people do overlook how much the aquarium trade and hobby particularly works as an arcing mechanism. So a good example is the tequila split fin, which is a little live bear from Mexico whose habitat has been severely degraded, and it was extinct in the wild. The Bristol Zoo started a program in England to start breeding this fish, but they had to get the fish first. And where did that fish come from? It came from a small dedicated group of hobbyists who were keeping this fish. They aren't those little split fins are not the prettiest fish in the world. They're kind of most people would call them ugly brown fish. Now, I have an affinity personally for ugly brown fish, so I think they're gorgeous. But most people, they're not that eye-catching. They're not an emperor angelfish. They're not even a cardinal tetra. So most people aren't going to look. But there's a lot of dedicated hobbyists who are keeping and breeding these things. And what happened was they went to the aquarium hobby and said, okay, we need some of these fish. And they ended up in the Bristol Zoo. They ended up in other zoos in aquariums around the world, and eventually were reintroduced to their habitat in Mexico, where they were completely extinct. They were extinct in the wild, and there are now wild populations that only exist because of the aquarium trade. So with this legislation, because there's a minimal quantity provision, that species would only be added to the whitelist if minimum quantities were already in trade. Those rare endangered species that are kept by very specialized aquarists who are intent on protecting these fish that may not have mass market appeal, they would be the first ones hit and the hardest hit, because they almost certainly will not be included on the whitelist. One thing is those very specialized species that not many people are keeping and are kept by very dedicated, but arguably the most important people keeping fish, they will be the most impacted. So that's it's going to be a disaster for species if this goes through.
Yeah, that sounds horrible. I would like to sort of direct people to PJAC as a way to stay sort of updated on this. They have a
Yes.
legislation tab that you can.
Right. So PJAC, the United States Association of Reptile Keepers, really have been the ones sort of leading the charge from the beginning on this, because obviously they're very much impacted as well. And also the National Animal Interest Alliance. The National Animal Interest Alliance actually has an article right there on their homepage right now that you can go to, and it has a really easy, you can read all about this. I actually published an article there. And so you can go through and see the finer details that maybe we weren't able to cover in a short video here. But you can go there, and at the bottom, there is a link that will direct you directly to a way, makes it very easy for you to contact your senator and tell them why you're concerned, and point out that, you know, this will impact conservation, this will impact livelihoods, not only here in the United States, but abroad, and tell them you oppose this. And we already have mechanisms in place that are effective at preventing invasive species and injurious wildlife. Let's utilize those, and let's not go overboard and really push this to a place where it's doing more harm than good.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. For all of the information. And so again, people who would like to stay up to date please get involved. Please stay up to date. Check out the websites that we'll link below. And don't forget about this, because this is very important. It's good to make your opinion known. Don't assume that someone else is going to write letters to your senators. We want everybody to be involved in this, because it's a much bigger deal than us and our aquariums. It's people's livelihoods, it's people's jobs, it's the environment in some of the most biologically important areas of the world that could be impacted negatively by this. So please get involved and stay up to date on this. Check out PJAC's website and play along, please. Thank you.